Canada was built on transportation, first by waterways, then by rail, bringing settlers and their goods to the west, carrying grain and other produce east. Confederation required a line to the Pacific, hence the CPR. Other lines would link the smaller centers in a network and eventually form the CNR. Governments would rise or fall on the politics of chartering and financing railroads. Stretching more than 500 miles northeast from the Pas, Manitoba to Churchill, the Hudson Bay Railway is one of the forgotten components in the Canadian national system. Yet its genesis reaches back almost to Confederation, and the dream it represents is as old as the Hudson's Bay Company. Its story is one of endless frustration. Its existence is a triumph over all odds and over nature itself. Following the Canadian Pacific, the Western land boom began only at the very end of the 19th century. Then, as wheat production soared, so did criticism of the CPR. It failed to move grain fast enough. It subsidized Eastern manufacturers at the expense of Western farmers. It was a monopoly. Prairie autonomy required another railway, perhaps to the north, that would carry the grain to the ships of the world harbored in Hudson's Bay. To build a railway across prairie and to finance it on the anticipated sales of farmland was one thing. To build it through the rock and muskeg of the north, where settlers would never come, was quite another. A series of private ventures failed in the Northwest before the railway finally reached the Pas, a little frontier town that boomed with the arrival of steel in 1908. Under pressure from the mining companies as well as the grain growers, the government began the northern route with the spanning of the Nelson River at the Pas in 1910. From here, the location party, with surveyors, topographers, chainmen, and axemen, would set out on their trek north and east to chart the route to Port Nelson, the railway's projected terminus. On the route from Manitou Rapids to Port Nelson in the fall of 1913.
It was a beautiful evening when we slipped away down the Red River by Old St. Peter's Church into the lake and then northerly to Norway House. From there we were on our own with our own canoes. The party consisted of about 21 men. We had supplies for up to 18 months. We camped just above where we're standing, and the axemen and chainmen that we had on the party came from the Split Lake Indians. They were excellent men. We taught them to count, and they're good chainmen, first-class axemen, of course. Splendid fellows to work with and to have in camp. Very, very clean, proud people in those days. Had a lot of fun. if you understood the Indians, the best way to work with them was to make a decision in the morning how far you were going to cut line in relation to how difficult it would be. Might cut maybe 2 miles or 3 miles. And no matter how early you completed that, you would keep your word and return to camp. But there was always fun paddling across the lake or somewhere. A loon had surfaced and we had to chase the loon and see if we could come up where it would surface again. And a lot of fun all around. It was a happy, happy summer. That was 1913.
After 15 hazardous months, the survey reached Nelson, but the railway never did. The choice of harbor site had been a mistake. Construction of facilities was proceeding, but it was unexpectedly costly and ultimately futile. There seemed no way to control the silting of the harbor by the Nelson River. An artificial island was built to divide the current. Spans of the bridge linking the island with the dock still stand in the empty harbor. The construction crews were following in the surveyor's footsteps. For many workers from Western Europe, it was a hard introduction to life in Canada. Without modern equipment, they cut out and removed rock by hand, wheeled gravel up trestles to build embankments, filled in swamps, chopped through ice to sink poles and lay sleepers. Paradoxically, a major lack was transportation.
All the contractors and engineers' supplies had to be taken in to respective sites during the winter over the frozen terrain. There was no means of supplying during the summer except in a limited way by canoes. Hundreds of teams were brought in from the prairies for this work, and each team would haul a loaded sleigh 10 miles and return to his respective overnight barn with an empty every day until everything was filled up. It was essential that everything needed would be taken in during the winter. If it wasn't, they were just out of luck and had to put it out. The cash keeper had charge of supplies. Over him there would be a walking boss. The walking boss had say, 50 miles of the line under his jurisdiction, and he'd walk up and down between the cash keepers, you see. He was boss along there, on his feet always, not walking clothes. And Mike was quite a character. He could go along with a package of cigarettes and make some fella digging a ditch through permafrost with an axe and make him think he had a good job.
Isolation was very much part of the life. The only contact the men had was people outside the camp, was the occasional encounter with Indians or trappers. Emil Buss used to run a trap line across the Hudson Bay lowlands from the railway and was always ready to extend every hospitality to the workers.
I remember visiting you and your partner at the Deer River one Easter. Huh? You came on a track motor car, and you were kind enough to invite me in for the night, and you introduced me to pure alcohol, and I was scared blue to death. You assured me that I'd never get a headache after that, and you were quite right. You didn't see your nose, either. But you fixed the ears.
Despite the outbreak of war, construction had reached almost to Kettle Rapids by the fall of 1915.
Most of us then applied for leave of absence to join the armed forces. When we left, it was without knowing it would be nearly 10 years before I would see the Hudson Bay country again.
In the dark days of 1917, all construction stopped. The war called men away and materials became scarce. 10 years, $20 million had produced a ghost harbor, more than 300 miles of track that ended nowhere. The last 100 miles, in fact, were abandoned, and for 9 years left to the elements. Stretches of track were torn up for use as scrap metal. Meanwhile, the mining companies had been expanding into northern Manitoba. Operations remained small until the war increased the need for copper and zinc. In the long run, a revitalized trunk line might be more important to the mining industry than to the grain growers. But war had increased the world demand for grain. It continued into the post-war years. There was money now on the wheat belt. The determined farmers formed the On to the Bay Association to press for completion of the line and to lobby against government transportation policy. In the election of 1926, Western Liberal MPs went down to defeat. The government took warning and agreed to rehabilitate the old line and complete it to the bay. But a consulting engineer from England, Sir Frederick Palmer, had recommended Churchill over Nelson as the terminus. In the winter of 1926-27, Major Charles, now supervising engineer, set out on foot with 2 Split Lake Indians to test the practicality of building on across the Muskeg to Churchill. As they moved northwards, the trees became small and stunted. The Indians called this the land of the little sticks. Finally, even this gave way to the faceless tundra of the barren lands.
When we came out from the land of the little sticks to this vast area you see with nothing, I was breaking trail ahead of the dogs and waited for Matthias to catch up. He looked around and shook his head and said, "No sticks, no sticks." I said nothing and continued on. I wasn't too sure that he was very happy to follow, as it was new country to him. After getting ahead, I turned around to see if they were coming, and they were following me.
The decision was made in favor of Churchill, and the costly harbor at Nelson, the artificial island, the docks and elevator were all abandoned. Tractor trains carried the supplies and facilities on to Churchill. Swung north as Major Charles set out again, this time to stake out the final route. With 25 men traveling by dog sled, he worked for 4 months in temperatures 40 degrees below zero.
Knowing that we'd be out all winter, we took Christmas dinner. Specially prepared turkey, trimmings and everything with it, and a gallon jug of old tree rum. We had dinner on the edge of the Barrenlands, Christmas dinner. That was the only day that we, outside of Sundays, that we didn't work all winter, except in 2 days in a storm that we couldn't see, visibility we couldn't see the edge. We'd given the cook an extra shot of rum to put in the sauce for the pudding, the plum pudding. And on the way in, of course, everybody got a little happy, and the cook, he says, you know, you gave me some extra rum to put in the pudding. I drank that and put spices in, and you buggers didn't know the difference.
That next winter, Major Charles saw the track stretch northwards. Building on tundra frozen permanently to within a foot of the surface was a new challenge. Conventional telegraph poles would heave out of the ground or topple in high winds. Instead, special tripods of 3 cedar poles were designed, unique to the Hudson Bay Railway, that to this day remain in excellent condition and alignment, sitting on top of the permafrost. This last 60 miles of the Hudson Bay Railway also made railroad history as the only extended track built without a prepared roadbed. Here the traditional pioneer or track layer placed rails and ties directly over the permafrost. Churchill, too, was bustling with activity as work started on the new harbor and grain elevator, awaiting the arrival of the railway. The boom was short-lived, however. On April 1st, 1929, the skeleton track reached Churchill, and the first supply train rolled in 2 weeks later. But it was September 1931 before the route was officially opened, and by then the Great Depression was well underway. Declining markets deflated prices. Locusts and drought cut the yield of grain. The old dream of a cheaper route to Europe, founded on high insurance rates, and the short navigation season in the bay. Then came war again, and for a time the port was closed to commercial shipping. That was the Hudson Bay Railway's 1 year of profit, while an American military base was being built. As part of the Canadian national system, the Hudson Bay Railway is maintained even at a loss, and recently the On to the Bay Association has again tried to stimulate greater use of the line. A few trains still roll northward, and perhaps they are conscious of serving more than one function. The Hudson Bay Railway has itself been a pioneer in opening a part of northern Canada. It has provided the trunk line from which spurs fan out to the mines of remote northern communities. Still little known, it is nonetheless a part of the Canadian epic of achieving communication against all odds, a tribute to the courage and dedication of the men who planned it, and of the men like Major Charles, who helped to build the Hudson Bay Railway.